Chapter 27. There was very little that Victor and Row 82 could do to persuade Sig and Kirana to take a cautious approach when they came across the old chapel on the hill. Row 82 regretted having been so forthcoming with the others regarding Jonathan's location. Victor also thought it would be best to ensure they did not become victims of the control demon master Jason Torres, who had apparently forded up there. There were only small shrubs and tall grass on the hill, making it easy to spot anyone coming up, let alone someone of Sig's size. The lack of cover normally would have bothered Kirana, but with Jonathan in trouble, she was anxious to put another syndicate master down. Victor was certainly not wanting to delay their approach too long. After all, he was carrying Jonathan's severed finger and Kirana's brief instructions to fix it. On the other hand, he recalled the difficulties they faced with William Fine, and the only one of them that was in a good position to counter the control demon worshipper techniques was the one they were attempting to rescue. Row 82 quickly realized there was nothing he could say that would slow down Sig or Kirana, so he began trying to assess the strengths and weaknesses of their target in the hopes he could provide some support. The use of his key helped Row 82 see the old church with crystal clarity in the low light. The building was made out of old stone covered with light stucco. There was a red tile roof that was missing some tiles, and a number of walls that seemed to be decorative attached to the sides and back that surrounded a small courtyard. He could also see that a wooden cross that had been on the top had been recently cut down and was lying on the side of the hill. There were small round windows on each side of the small chapel, and a large dark wooden door positioned over a few small stairs that faced them on the hill. "Where in the chapel is Jonathan?" whispered Victor. "He's on the far side," replied Row 82, away from the door. "Lizard is in there too. Also, there's an opening in the roof on the far side." The strategy was not spoken, but it was understood. Victor would try to get to Jonathan and heal him, then they would hope for the best. None of the rest of them had been effective in dealing with mind control. Sig and Kirana marched through the grass up the hill. Victor and Row 82 gave looks of concern as they circled around the base of the hill to attempt an ascent from the other side. Though Sig and Kirana had every intention of using brute force to quickly overwhelm their opponent, Victor and Row 82 knew that they would be playing the role of distraction as they attempted to heal Jonathan. The hill was not extremely steep, but it was clear the church had not been used in some time, and the path that led to the stairs had not been well kept. Even with the exertion required, Sig and Kirana seemed to be racing one another, and by the time they were close to the top, they were both sprinting. Kirana decided that she would make a distraction of her own. She gripped her mirrored key, and it expanded into a massive burning blade. She leapt and swung her sword at the side of the old chapel, slicing a large chunk of wall out. Sig used the opportunity to kick in the door and rush inside. Row 82 and Victor rushed up and tried to scale the wall of the chapel. Small outcroppings of stone and wood through the stucco provided enough holds that they were able to reach the top of a decorative wall and then leap on top the tile roof. The tiles were already partly broken, and as Victor landed on them, they crumbled and Victor fell down below. Row 82's eyes glowed brightly as he tried to get an idea of where everyone was before entering, but he suddenly stopped as he heard a cruel laugh echo within the chapel. "You too?" came the voice. It was Jason Torres. "I didn't think I would see you after the tournament. You really screwed things up, you know." The sound of scampering footsteps was suddenly cut short. "I don't think so," shouted Jason. "We can't have you waking him up. After all, he's the key." Row 82 immediately recognized that Jason was referring to Jonathan, although he did not understand why he was referring to him as a key. "You know, though, I can't keep all three of you going constantly," said Jason. "It requires a lot of effort." "What will you do?" asked Victor. "First, let's make sure everyone is here, and that we all understand how this is being managed," said Jason. Row 82 felt his body contort. He tried to fight for control of his arms and legs, but he knew he was being dragged in. He opened his mouth and shrieked, but he stopped as he crashed into the ground near where Victor was standing. "You know," said Jason, "that ability of yours is fascinating. I have to admit, I really thought you were the one to beat, especially with how Angelica seemed to glow around you." Row 82 strained his senses, but he could find nothing on the interior of the chapel that he had not noticed from the outside. There was a table near the front holding dozens of red candles. The orange light flickered in the dimly lit room and revealed the aged wood on the old pews. Some of the pews had been destroyed, and there were burns and stains on the visible parts of the floor. The remnants of small statues and icons could be seen scattered along the walls, and upside down in the corner was an image of Christ on a cross. Sig and Kirana stood still, and except for the fact that their eyes were open, they were standing upright, and Sig was not snoring loudly, Row 82 might have thought they were asleep. Lizard stood near the door, and Jonathan was lying down on a table behind Row 82 and Victor. "Well, I guess it doesn't matter anymore," said Jason as he waved his hands. Victor and Row 82 stepped away from Jonathan and sat down in one of the pews that was still intact. "Although your escape put me in a difficult situation for a while," Row 82 did not care about what happened to Jason, but he supposed that it would be more pleasant than being pulled around with mind control like a small dog on a tight leash. "I was the prime suspect," said Jason. "Of course, I was always the prime suspect because of my management experience, but Angelica was really upset with me. Not that I care what Angelica thinks, but the fact that she believed Carson Price made me mad. That guy and his cheap predictions. I still think he was involved with what happened." In spite of his initial disinterest, Row 82 had to admit that he was curious to know why the Demon Masters of the Syndicate had seemed to have split up. "The Demon Witch knew what was coming, though. She knew everything," said Jason. He had an awkward smile on his face as he said Demon Witch, and even without his perceptive abilities, Row 82 could tell that Jason was infatuated with Miranda Drake. She knew what was happening, but she had a plan. Angelica's tournament was perfect for her plans. Survival of the fittest. Jason turned around and raised his hands toward Kirana and Sig. They leapt forward and moved to face one another. "And since the fading is coming," said Jason with sadistic glee, "I am going to find out which is more fit, Heaven's Sword or Heaven's Shield." Sig and Kirana pulled out their divine keys as Jason flicked his fingers. A golden sphere surrounded Sig, and Kirana's key became a burning katana. Victor and Row 82 strained to move, which caught Jason's attention. "No!" he shrieked angrily as he spun around. "I am management, not you!" He pointed at Victor, forcing him to slam his head against the back of the pew in front of him. Blood oozed out of Victor's forehead, and Row 82 could tell that he was dizzy and disoriented, notwithstanding his body returning to an upright position. "But maybe," said Jason as he pointed at Row 82, "maybe you are just as curious as I am." Jason laughed as he forced Row 82 to stand up so that he had a clear view of Sig and Kirana. He then pointed at Victor and manipulated him to stand next to Row 82. "This will be interesting," said Jason as he turned back to Sig and Kirana. "The absolute defense against the perfect weapon." Kirana's sword began burning brighter, and Sig's shield began glowing more intensely as the two stepped slowly toward one another. The unconscious glaze in their eyes had disappeared with the white light that accompanied the activation of divine keys, but the way their heads slumped forward proved that neither of the two of them were aware of their peril. As Jason flicked his wrist, Kirana pulled her sword back and lunged toward Sig. As the blade hit the shield, blinding light shone from them. Jason squinted his eyes and flicked his wrists. When Row 82's eyes adjusted, he could tell that Kirana's sword had been withdrawn from Sig's shield. "Well, that's disappointing," said Jason, "but I'm sure I can manage something better." He began flicking his wrists again, forcing Kirana to swing back and forth against Sig's golden shield. The bright flashes of light were painful to watch, but Row 82 could not turn his head away. After a few moments, though, he discovered that he could close his eyelids. Even with his eyelids closed, the sound of the burning blade hacking at Sig's defense echoed through the small chapel. The metal plates behind Row 82's ears amplified each sound, and his mind gave him a picture of what was happening. Because they were being controlled, the power of their keys was not being fully accessed. At low levels, it was difficult to predict whether the sword or the shield would prevail. In the past, Row 82 would have been interested in seeing the result of a fight between the divine key-bearers, but now he found himself hoping that Sig's power would prevail so that the two of them would not be injured. Suddenly, Row 82's attention was drawn to Jonathan Knight. His body had begun convulsing. Even with his eyes closed, Row 82 could tell that Jonathan was sweating. He suspected that Leslie Fisher had probably not been concerned with sterilizing the knife she had used to slice off Jonathan's finger, and it was obvious that his exhaustion, dehydration, and shock could have been treated better by almost anyone besides a psychopathic demon master who referred to himself as management. Of course, Row 82 knew what had happened to Victor when he had tried to help Jonathan, and in the past, Row 82 would not have ever given a second thought to the suffering or death of another unless it could negatively affect him. He had no strong friendship with Jonathan Knight, and he even found the romantic drama between Jonathan and Kirana tedious. Even considering this, there was something that seemed to call to him. It was as though his body responded involuntarily as he suddenly strained to turn toward Jonathan Knight. As soon as Row 82 strained against Jason's control, the demon master turned around. "You know she was wrong about you," thundered Jason angrily. "Miranda thought you were the beginning of a new age. She thought your augmentations would guide the Syndicate when the Black Keys failed." Jason's word choice surprised Row 82. Why would he claim that his power was failing? "It's too bad you ended up being no different from those other heretics," he added. Jason walked up close. Row 82 found that he had lost control of his eyelids as the full focus of Jason Torres rested upon him. He wanted to shriek with the full power of his vocal implants, but he knew that he was in no position to do anything, and the only person that had the tools to effectively combat Jason was in desperate need of medical care. Row 82 strained to see if he could reach his key and at least use its power to check for anything else that he might have missed in their surroundings. Unfortunately, Jason could tell what he was thinking. "You think your stupid observational skills can help you against management?" shouted Jason. His voice grew increasingly shrill, and spittle flew from his mouth and showered Row 82. "I can even see your thoughts! Nothing is hidden from me. Nothing surprises me. Nothing gets by me. I am management." He flicked his wrists, using his powers to force Row 82 to move. The augment's body twisted awkwardly, and he fell onto the ground. "I'm going to break you!" screamed Jason. Row 82 was unable to make a sound, but if he could have, he would have screamed. After a few moments, Jason flicked his wrists, and Row 82's body went limp. "I've got a better idea," said Jason in a low voice with a sadistic smile. "I'm going to manage your breathing." He waved his fingers, and Row 82 inhaled deeply, then pressed his lips together and pinched his nose with his fingers. The thought of being forced to suffocate himself was unsettling, but no amount of effort allowed him to open his mouth or release his nostrils. "I'm going to manage everything you do," chided Jason. "I'm going to manage your diet. I'm going to manage your movements. I'm going to manage—" Jason paused and spun around with sadistic delight. "Hang on," he said. You still have your sensor abilities. I'm going to manage those. I'm going to use you to manage my security, and since I can just read your mind, I don't need to rely on you to speak. I'll just make you rip your vocal cords out." He turned to Victor. "And I can use him to manage the healing of all my servants," laughed Jason. "With you divine key bearers at my disposal, I will be able to manage everyone and everything. I'll make what William Fine did with the news media look like a letter to the editor." He turned back to Row 82 and drew uncomfortably close to his face. "Thanks to you, I will be the ultimate manager," said Jason triumphantly. "Manage this," shouted Lizard with air quotes after he jammed a knife into Jason's back. Jason's eyes widened as he whirled around. Row 82 had forgotten all about Lizard. He knew that Lizard had been the victim of mind control techniques before, and had discounted him as being important to their efforts, but as he saw the tall space key bearer in his long tan coat, he realized that the ability to change his position instantly was ideal for sneaking up on a mind reader that focused on what he could sense nearby. Sig and Kirana slumped down to the ground. Victor groaned in agony, but crawled over to Jonathan and pressed the palm of his hand against Jonathan's forehead. The convulsions stopped almost immediately. Victor reached into his pocket and retrieved Jonathan's severed finger. He ripped off the dirty bandage that had been taped to the wound and pressed the finger in place. Victor's eyes glowed brightly as Jonathan screamed in pain. After a moment, the light dimmed. Row 82 looked in shock and awe as Jonathan Knight got to his feet. "We've got to get up north," said Jonathan. "The Death Witch has Jennifer and Stephanie."